Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Yeah,
Um,
2022.
it's culturally acceptable now for us to think about how much things are going to be different or great now because the calendar has shifted the number everybody forgets. Like it probably takes people,
Everything's
depending on what
better now.
but it's better now, right?
Everything's better now.
Uh,
Yeah.
yeah. A lot of folks, and I'll say this kind of from my perspective, are like, 2022 is going to be the same as 2021. Like, well, that's pretty much how it always is. Like, there's not that much change because it's winter and then it's still winter.
Yeah.
Um, you know, that's going to be okay. Things are
You,
fine.
you you don't change the entire culture around you by simply turning a page on a calendar.
But that's how it's supposed to work. That's what we're told.
No. No.
Um, so in a little bit, a minute or two, good morning, Daryl. We
Morning.
are going to talk about communication in the local church community, and creating an environment that's healthy for that.
What's that?
But it's like something like that. We're talking about words,
I wasn't
communicate
listening.
things. Yeah, that's normal. But before we do that, Terry, what's your best memory from this year's holiday season for your family? And you cannot mention
Oh.
your inflatables.
I bought another one for next year. It's in the attic. Um, Hands down, I won Christmas this year. I bought a gift for my wife that was from her childhood, like
I
40
remember
years
seeing that.
ago.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, let's just say that if you're going to buy a working electronic vintage alarm clock that from the 70s, be prepared to drop a little change on that because I found broken ones that I was going to repair and rebuild to the best of my ability that were like $80 broken.
Yeah, that's a good note.
and, and this was a little bit more than that, fully functioning. And the minute in the box, by the way, original box. So when she opened the box and she started, if you've seen the video on my Facebook page, she just starts yelling, "No, it's not! No, it's not!" Like
Yeah.
it automatically turned her into a child, which was totally cool. It's worth every dime. So I'll never forget that. That's the best moment ever. And we kept it a secret. Like I'm terrible about keeping secrets. I bought that thing the Thanksgiving morning. I ordered that from eBay. And by the way, first purchase from eBay like in 15 years. Not been on eBay that much, but that's where you go for things like
Amazon kind of crushed eBay in some ways.
yeah.
When you can find out the new price of the same thing is versus buying somebody else's used one, you start going, which of these two is me? Which of these two is me?
But there's a market for eBay, and this was it.
Yeah, for sure. I think probably one of the fun moments from this year is we played some party game one night, and it's like who in the group is most likely to, and the question was who is the most likely to snoop their presents, and pretty much everybody pointed at Jill. Like she's most likely,
Really?
apparently according to the family, to be the one to snoop around and try to see what she's doing for
Really?
Christmas. Um,
By
so
the way, she's
surprising
going
was
to kill
this.
you for even mentioning her name one line.
She doesn't watch this anyway.
Yeah.
So
I'm going to send her a message, though. Bill talked about you today. Go
yeah,
listen.
well, that's fine. I'm old enough now where if I die, I'm good. It's fine. I've done some stuff.
Hope. Yeah. I mean, hey, there you go.
Yeah,
Yeah. I mean, it was a weird Christmas, too. Like, we're in shorts and t shirts on the patio Christmas Day. And,
that's correct. Like it was in the
you know,
70s for
yeah,
a while.
almost
It's
80 on Christmas Day here.
it's back to chilly weather here, but okay, let's get into the matter of our rationale to be here, our reason to being, um, and I want to reemphasize this. We're going to be talking about communication within the boundary of the local church, your local Christian community, and thinking about how all of our interactions can be engaged in a way that's helpful. And when I say helpful, I don't necessarily mean just all good, positive, healthy things. I mean, sometimes communication needs to be critical. It needs to be full of appropriate contextual critique, and good criticism is incredibly helpful. But for emotions, egos, all that stuff. Good criticism is also in the potential of being hurtful at times. And hurting doesn't seem to help until you kind of recover from it. So, Terry, this is partially your good idea, if not wholly. And so, what were you thinking with this? And by the way, Hal, I'll talk a little bit more about this at the end of the episode. I think there's some great stuff about geography going on, but we'll put that at the close of things. I'll try to remember about that. And Barry and Jeremy do some good work there, especially with their visual stuff, like singing the Bible lines. Go ahead, Terry.
Yeah, love the new Appian Media video about the seven churches. It's amazing. Um, you and I have both been preaching for a while. Let's say it's well over 20 years, and I don't know about you, but like the number one complaint over the years has been a lack of communication from leadership to the people in the pew. Like it's not uncommon for people to at least claim. I'm not going to say whether the claims are true or not, but to claim they have no idea what's going on. And over the 20 plus years I've preached, we talk a lot about vision and mission, and in a sense, all of that's simple, right? Like mission's simple, but at the same time, it's not. And it's the responsibility of leadership, specifically the shepherds, to kind of help us go, here's where our thought process is, here's where we're headed, here's what our focus is. But I can tell you that there's just a lot of places where that's just not happening. There's no communication of that. Now, another show, but partially sometimes that's because leadership is totally reactive and more administrative, and they're just keeping the lights on, okay, for lack of a better term, and there is no vision. And that's not what we're talking about today. We're going to assume that the leadership has a plan, has a focus, has a good vision. There's got to be a communication of that. And not just your vision, by the way. Communication has to be open all the time. I just think this is where it starts. So, and I think the issue becomes a lot of times, even to follow that up, Phil, I think a lot of times when we think about communication and maybe what we'll call a congregational meeting, where it's two-way communication, that a lot of times what happens is that really becomes more administrative as well. It becomes more about human resources. Let me give an example of that. The human resources approach is we have the deacon over the classes get up and talk about how he needs more teachers, right? And so that's kind of the help wanted section. And then we have the financial guy give up and give us the financial state of the church address with the budget and all that kind of stuff. And I'm not even sure, at least for me, I don't think that's the important stuff. Like, I think again, that just is a reflection of a very consumer-driven administrative approach, which is not the kind of communication we're talking about. And so that's hard, I think, sometimes for us to venture into that area. And the kind of communication I think that needs to happen in churches is, and for us, we're doing that this Sunday morning during our Sunday morning class time. I know you guys are doing it the week after that. And I think after your assembly is probably what you're doing. You can do that a lot of ways. There needs to be a time period for the leadership. Here, it's going to be the elders and myself. They're going to get up and talk about some things. I'm going to talk about our sermons for the calendar year, like where we're going. We have 3 different series, and there's going to be some things that are new with some of that. All that's going to happen, and there's going to be an opportunity to ask questions. It's interactive. There needs to be a time period for that, Phil. And honestly, I think about spiritual things is where I think that's important. That this needs to be largely a spiritual discussion, not an administrative discussion. And that's kind of the genesis of today's show in my mind.
Yeah, and here's an illustration of this. I think there's a number of key points I've kind of sketched out for conversation today: clarity, context, content, criticism. These are things that need to be part of a basket of communication.
Nice alliteration, by the way. Good job, preacher.
Yeah, good. So on the clarity side, Sunday past, I mentioned in the space between our call to worship and before the sermon actually starts, a couple of things that are available for this new year for the congregation, one of them being a Bible reading plan. And I just mentioned it briefly. I said, hey, there's a Bible reading plan available for you in the back. If you also can get it in an email, just let me know and I'll send you an email of that plan. Or I can send you a link that you can add it to your calendar. And it was like, that's the extent of what I said. Afterwards, talking to my family and a few other visitors, I'm like, hey, how many of you heard that heard me say that specific thing? Man, it was a 50% divide.
Yeah.
Half of them heard it. Some of them thought I had said it in the Bible class that morning, not before the service. Some of them were like, he said something about it, not quite sure what it was.
Well, if it was your family, they don't listen to you anyway.
Some of them were adamant that there was zero mention of it at all. So I scrolled in the video and I said, okay, now here's exactly what I said.
Can I ask which one Jill was? Which one was Jill?
None of your business.
She was too busy snooping around for her packages to listen to what you were saying.
Yeah. But no, I showed a little video and immediately everyone's like, okay, yeah, he said it, but he didn't really make it a point. Like you weren't clear enough. And so there's two ways I can respond to it. The initial response is, hey, look, on the wall, I said it, I win, victory lap. But a little down the road, you start thinking, okay, that's not the outcome that I want. I don't want them to just know that I said a thing. I want communication to take place to a way that they know that I said it isn't what matters. That they actually gain the information that I was trying to convey. And so on a practical level, I achieved the goal of saying the thing, but I did not achieve the actual goal of making that information accessible.
You didn't actually communicate very well.
I didn't communicate. And it was just a passing comment. And it wasn't necessarily like the big part of the sermon at all. It was just like, hey, here's this thing. But it also comes out in an email. It also is available in other ways. Like we've got a multiple number. And that's part of this giving it clarity is that repetition takes place.
Oh, yeah.
And then Wednesday night, there'll be another message about it. And Sunday, there'll be another message about it. And in our congregational meeting, which takes place soon, there'll be a message about it too.
And on your Facebook page, there's a listing of the daily Bible readings.
Right. Like all that stuff's going out because of this principle. This is also really kind of time appropriate. Right now, kids are going back to school. Some of adults are going into additional studies. Everybody's getting a syllabus. Every college professor I know complains uniformly that their students do not read the syllabus. Or if they do read the syllabus, they don't read the syllabus with an intent to understand and seek out questions to things that they don't find clear to them. And then like at the end of the semester, they'll go, hey, is there any room for extra credit? And the answer of the professor is, did you read the syllabus? And the students go, well, what do you mean? Of course I read that, but they didn't actually read it. I think there's a component where you have to kind of balance communication and understand your audience and realize students are never going to read the syllabus. So you've got to give it a different way. The syllabus actually exists, I think, for administration and not for the students. That's my theory.
Listen, my theory on that, and pretty much any written thing, you could throw the bulletin into this, is but a lot of written text exists simply to prove that somebody is working in some fashion. So you produce the syllabus to go, see, I have a plan if anybody questions you. Otherwise, you don't write that. And even the bulletin, here's a little secret. We write the bulletin, 100 people there, maybe 15 people are reading the bulletin, maybe at best. That's why we don't. I mean, I don't know about you, Phil. We have a printed bulletin. We don't even print enough for half of our people.
We don't print a bulletin.
We throw them away, and it's just one of those nostalgic traditions we're going to keep around for a while. But that exists to go, hey, look, we're working, we're doing stuff. At the end of the day, though, it's just poor communication at this point, and it is what it is. It's a written record, but it's not actually. Nobody's listening, nobody's reading, and repetition is so important here on any level, and not just repetition, but repeating it in different ways so that you can hopefully get different listeners in different ways. Mark Roberts says every passage notation in his sermon 3 times and always at least 2 ways. So if it's, Matthew 5:14, the book of Matthew, chapter 5, verse 14, Matthew 5:14, like he does that because he's trying to get you to listen. And so it's the same way. Repetition works, but you've got to also try to change that method up a little bit, shake it up a
Right.
little.
And part of that is to create a clear message is to develop white space around the things that matter. When you're doing, editing a paper, production stuff, if you want something to really stand out, you don't need to use a lot of color, splashy stuff. You create white space around it. You literally eliminate everything else that's right there, and you say, "I'll make this the only thing that's there." You can do that verbally. You can verbally create white space by doing uncomfortable things. We do the Bible class all the time. I'm going to ask a question, and I'm going to wait
Yeah.
uncomfortably until
Have you
something
ever
is answered.
said to your Bible class, guys, I can wait all day. Somebody's gonna
All the
have to
time.
answer this question.
Yeah.
I'm like,
Like,
I can
I'm not
wait.
going anywhere either. We're
Because
here.
the funny thing is about that, by the way, when it comes to Bible class, and I know this is slightly off topic, but like everybody complains that they don't want lectures and they want participation, and nobody answers the question. So you're just like, hey, look, we'll just sit here. We're good.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna respond until you do.
Yeah.
But yeah, you could do that. You could create white space, and I think that the key is I remember in "They Smell Like Sheep" by Lynn Anderson reading years ago this that he was really talking about trying to break this leadership kind of pattern of clergy laity that existed in churches on a grand scale. And even though we wouldn't use those terms, I think even historically within churches, there's kind of this ivory mentality of the preachers, not the preacher and the elders versus the congregation. Um, I mean, the truth of the matter is we've seen those congregations where the elders meet in the conference room all the time. And like if you meet with the elders, you've got to go to their conference room. They're not going to come to your house. They're not going to meet you on your level. You got to go upstairs to their conference room and meet them in their room. And that's a very physical way of a practice that causes this distinction that many feel. And when that's carried over into communication, where it's like, hey, we're the elders here, we're going to pass down mandates. By the way, that's not what we're talking about today. Passing down mandates and orders is not the kind of communication we're talking about.
Right. And that
Because
shifts us.
people don't
Go ahead.
listen the same way that you were talking about. That
Yeah.
will fall into the not listening communication area. Nobody's going to hear that.
So let's talk about the context of these communications. We say like some things we're talking about, some things we're not.
Yeah.
You know, every bit of communication within the local church has value to a certain degree, a kernel of its need and space. But not every bit of communication needs to be directed out of the same hose. We need to be able to realize that, hey, this is not something for that. So, if you're going to do a meeting that talks about the year theme and like what you're going to talk about, that's a great narrow topic. That means you then say, this is what we're talking about. Every single thing underneath it, from the us giving to them side of things, needs to fit in that us giving to them space. Well, let's turn the table. Not all meetings are about here's the theme. Some meetings may be, hey, we need some feedback.
Yeah.
And so then you
And it may be a
say,
combination of both, by the way.
right. And so now you say, okay, now what needs to happen is the them, whomever the them is, are going to give feedback to the us. And we're the ones listening because we might be in a leading role in some way. Let's listen. That means you got to put your pause button on your interrupter, and you've got to accept that some of the things you're going to hear may not A, be desired, two, may not even be on topic, may need to be redirected, like all of those things, because you've got to create a context of, am I needing to respond to this right now?
Yeah.
The answer may be, no, not really. And I'm not really hurt by it. And what they said may even be true. It may not be true, but either way, giving that context really improves communication, because what you're doing is allowing voices that may not otherwise have a space have their space. This is why I've become a very big fan of congregational meetings, even in spaces when there are no elders,
Yeah.
because there is a component of the local church whose voice never gets heard. Voice number one, the unmarried. In business meeting contexts, almost exclusively, single men and single women are given less voice. They don't have kids in the Bible class, or if they do, They're a burden, not a blessing. Like that's an attitude that takes place in a lot of local churches. You get that congregational meeting, those voices, who sometimes are very sacrificial in their work and their ethic, now they have a voice. Now they have space, and they get to say the things that nobody else is going to say because there's less consequences to them in some ways. And so they get to say stuff that needs to be said. And that context gives you content of value. I really think that's an important aspect of trying to really connect these pieces together.
I think one of the things to really keep in mind about all of that is too with the congregational meeting. I'm not saying that we need to radically change things, but I do think that what quote church has become is far more formalized now in so many different ways than what it was what we read about in the first century. Things seem to be a little bit more conversational and interactive than they are now. And I think that applies especially to this area of communication, leadership. You see discussions happening um, in Acts, for instance, where it looks like these kind of business discussions, which are more spiritual than what we normally do, they're in the context of the whole congregation. They're not in the context of only the men. It's not, hey, women go cook us some meals while we have this meeting. Like that's not what happens. By the way, that doesn't mean that I'm promoting some egalitarianism. It's just that's the scriptural pattern, and we've gotten away from that largely in a lot of ways. Um, and I think that the ability for a congregation to come together as a family openly and have open communication is really important. And it's something that, by the way, Phil, a lot of places just haven't done for a long time. They just
Yeah.
haven't done.
And again, that's giving us, the steps of consideration where we're getting that context, like what are we going to talk about? Who's going to talk about it? Then the actual content comes into play. Like, what are we actually talking about in these meetings? You mentioned it earlier. We have kind of an HR concept of congregational discussion, whether that's a business meeting, a congregational meeting, other aspects of it. Not every bit of information is going to be shared in those same ways. And so figuring out what are we going to talk about in this meeting is important. Like, hey, is this something that's be better suited to be an email? Is this a small group conversation afterwards? Like what we need to talk about is this is the project and the group that's going to do the project. They don't need to be talking about this in a meeting of 100. Um, and I think part of that ties into this clarity aspect of things. Because if we fill up the meeting with 60 things, then people are only going to still remember one thing, maybe two, maybe three. The other 57 things that are all important now are lost because they were lost in the soup of the 60 ideas. And I think that's really kind of part of this process of figuring these things out, and further, and this kind of toenails into a series we did about 2 years ago that included some conversations with Max Dawson and Don Truax in regards to leaders in local churches. In that space, realize we've got to enable people to be successful. And people are much more capable of doing a good spiritual work than we sometimes give them credit for. Those young Christians that are, even teenagers, preteens, they can do a ton of good if we enable them to do so, even if it is in unconventional spaces. And that's part of the communication that takes place as well.
Yeah, I think it's interesting too that because we don't communicate kind of this shepherding model very well, that's why we're not doing a good job at recreating the shepherding model. Shepherding is with Max and Don. That was a huge point of what we talked about is what biblical shepherding leadership looks like, and that can't just happen in a closed environment. That needs to happen publicly. And so part of what needs to be communicated is that these are your shepherds and this is how they shepherd you spiritually. And if we don't do that, and this is again a pet peeve of mine, okay. Um, if the focus of our communication is this HR administrative stuff, then we're gonna adapt to this mentality that that's what biblical leadership is, and it's
Yeah.
not. And that's why, I mean, here's the truth. Like, if you're gonna have a congregational meeting and it's only gonna happen a couple times a year, like most places with elders, don't do a financial report, Phil. And here's why I say that. That's just another piece of clutter in the message that can distract people from what you're actually wanting them to hear.
Yeah.
It's just focus. You need to find out what really is important for you to communicate. What is, you can't, like you said, you can't come to the table with 60 things, because if you have 100 people there, they're going to take away 3 of the 60. They're not even going to be the same 3 things. Like,
Right.
narrow this thing way down to what's important.
My suggestion for that is quite simple. You get some financial concerns. Almost every congregation already provides that in other formats.
Right. It's
Remind
already
them,
in a written
hey,
format. If you really have a concern, go look at the written format.
go talk to the treasurer, go talk to the elders
Yeah.
specifically about it. You'll get better information.
Right.
And that's really part of it, is that you improve the quality of the information when you narrow the focus. Let me add this one thing. This is something that I know that you've probably seen before in some of these group communication contexts. Also, you see it sometimes in email chains. You're always going to get criticism or negative feedback. And it really just depends on how you're going to respond to it. If you go in with this attitude of well, no one's going to question or complain about anything we're doing, and then the minute that they do, you're just surprised and shocked, you've forgotten who you are. Everybody complains about everything. That's a human tendency. So the minute you
And
accept that,
what
it's
they
okay.
complain about may not even be the real problem. That's the other thing you got to understand. Like,
Yeah.
a lot of times what they publicly are vocal about is not their real issue.
Yeah.
So you need to go in with the commitment to not get defensive. Somebody has a complaint, you listen to it, and then you follow up privately. Don't turn it into a public spectacle. Like that has to be your real plan going in. Now, that's a lot harder to execute, by the way, than it is to plan. um,
And I'll pull an illustration from way back in my own past, and so there's nobody that's watching is probably going to even be negatively impacted by this. The Wilsonville Church of Christ at one time was meeting in a rented Grange Hall. It's like an old farmers community space, and we had an agreement to use it certain amounts of times and so and so, and we usually would get there early, cleaning up, do all that stuff. After one of our assemblies, one of the Grange Hall board members came to our assembly and jumped in at the close of it and just assumed that it'd be perfectly cool for him to step up and address the assembly of Christians together, just like this should be totally fine. And in that process, I'm sitting there talking to him in the back. I'm saying, "Hey, what's going on? Happy to see you here." And he's like, "Yeah, I really want to talk to the whole group because there's this issue that we need to find the answer to." I'm like, "Well, what's the issue?" And he's like, "Well, somebody stole our extension cord." And I'm thinking to myself, okay. We really don't want you addressing our assembly. And that's just not really appropriate for our assembly. But you're happy to stay with us afterwards and talk to anyone about it and discuss it in full there. In that communication moment, there's a number of ways to respond. And back then, I was much more aggressive than this short version. I was just like, no, like that's not going to happen.
no, we didn't
you know,
steal your extension cord.
yeah. In reality, like we didn't steal his extension cord. I have no idea what happened to it. There's 8 other people who rented that property over the course of each week. Like any number of them could have been now one extension cord bigger.
Richard.
Like, oh, they got an extension cord now. But he's coming in being upset about this. See, all the stuff that I don't know is why he's actually upset about an extension cord, because it's like $10.
Right.
So his level of anger was way beyond a $10 anger. And so that's an illustration of how all of us are. When we get frustrated, we exceed the parameters of the thing we're frustrated by. We get $100 anger over $10 things. And even if we solve the $10 thing, you're still $100 angry.
This is where the advice is: don't let your public communication meeting become a Facebook post where you get hung up on something and argue back and forth. Like we've all seen that on social media, right?
Yeah.
Don't do that in person.
Yeah.
And social media has trained us to cling to that one thing that we're just determined to get across till the death. And it could be a $10 extension cord.
Yeah.
Like, don't be that guy.
Yeah.
Don't be that guy.
Like a lot of that stuff is just quickly solvable. Oh, you're missing an extension cord?
Yeah, don't do it on Facebook either. Hal's right. Don't do it there either. But
yeah, here's one of my 5 extension cords. I'll be okay.
Yeah.
Like,
you can have all 5 if that'll make it better. Like
I think I read somewhere about giving someone a cloak and then going a mile with him, maybe 2. I'm unfamiliar with the outcome. But I think that's part of this whole picture of things. We get the last thing in this idea of criticism. Once you expect the idea that people are going to bring criticism to the table, you got to also add one more thing, realizing that the criticism may be voiced to you, but it may not be about you.
Yeah,
that's very common in the local church context, because we're dealing with relationships at this point. And relationships last longer than a moment in time.
The hardest part about the criticism too, by the way, is even if it's about you, is to welcome it, because that's the only way to grow, right? Like the only way to grow is to be helped along the way to see what's going to change. Here's the funny thing about leadership. Like our job is to criticize the members. Technically, we don't see it that way, but like, here's the things you need to work on. I'm going to preach on these things because that's what you need. And then they turn around and go, okay, I got that. And here's what you need. And you're like, no, I don't.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's the hard part. And none of us want to be told what we need to do. And sometimes, like you said, it's not even me. It's not even me.
Yeah. It could have been 2 preachers ago, 8 preachers ago, 2 elders ago.
It could have been a whole different congregation this person was a part of, that they're not even there now and they're with you, but they bring that baggage with them. Like there's so many possibilities here.
And it doesn't mean it's not accurate or valuable.
Right.
Hey, now that's a real concern. Maybe we need to be aware of that.
By the way, here's a piece of advice about criticism. Anytime somebody's willing to actually do it with themselves, like put their name to it, listen.
Yeah.
Because the opposite is true. Yeah, the anonymous criticism is the criticism you should not get worked up about, because nobody's willing to own it. But if somebody is publicly saying something critical, you need to listen. They're taking on this risk to offer this advice that you're taking personally. Listen to somebody who's willing to take on that risk.
Yep. Any last thoughts for today, Terry? We kind of hit our time edge.
Enjoy being back after a couple of weeks off. Hope everybody's doing well and enjoying the new year. And we're probably today is the 4th, so you're about 6 days away from breaking solution. So hang in there till the 10th, and then you can let them go.
Right. Yeah. This is a time where you put in your notice that gym membership you got on the 1st, because you're probably not going to continue it for the rest of the month.
Yeah.
And just going with math. Or you can do what some people be like, the quiet supporters of the gym industry. 6 months out of the year, they're paying for those memberships so that the costs are lower for everybody else. That's fine. It's a benevolent work. So let me add this last little kind of caveat, because Hal brought this up earlier. In regards
shameless
to
plug time.
Shameless
we need
plug.
One of those. We need that neon light that says shameless plug.
There's no shame. One of the strongest things you can do in developing a good understanding of the Bible lens is really to start digging into it. In regards to the work that Appia Media and Barry and Jeremy do, it's visually awesome.
Yep.
It's the best thing you can do to see the land without being there in the land. There's some great academic resources beyond their stuff. Those guys are great at what they do, but you might want to also dig into some good archaeologists, those who are doing some studies on recent findings, and how that all connects to the biblical record, or find one of the many tour groups that go all the time. Terry talks about shameless plug. Sure, Luke Chandler and I have a tour going in May. Awesome, go on that one. But there's other guys that are taking tours that'll be really good. Mike Willis is leading a tour that goes a little before ours in April. Leon Maudlin is still doing tours. Obviously, the Appian Media related folks, Barry and others are doing tours. There's a few other groups that still do tours. Go to the land yourself. If you can somehow arrange it, it will be more impactful than you can understand. And if you're talking to the leadership of local churches and saying, hey, how can we help improve our preaching? Send your preacher to the biblical lands and the worldview there. I guarantee you their teaching, their preaching, and their enthusiasm will increase significantly. So there's a shameless plug side. If you got questions, hit me directly. I'll send you links to any of those guys. The tours go at different times of the year, and there's a reason why you might prefer one group over another. That's totally cool. Terry, you got that look of like, smarmy, want to make a snide comment. It's not going to do it today.
It's not the 10th yet. I'm still resolved not to make smarmy comments towards you on through the word. We'll see
that's
how that
10
goes.
whole days. 10 whole days.
Yeah.
Hey, everyone. Hope you have a good day. If there's some way that Terry and I can help you in your work as evangelists and be encouragers to you, please let us know. Take care.